Well, thank you, Anne, for that wonderful introduction. And it's good to be here with you folks and with my colleagues, Anne and Noe. I bring you greetings from Lancaster Theological Seminary. I think you've already heard from two of my colleagues in the past few Sundays. God, open our ears so that we may hear your word, and open our eyes so that we may see the light shining from your revelation. Amen. Now, I grew up in a very biblically oriented family that took scriptural passages authoritatively and sometimes literally. Now, when I was in the 4th grade, my Sunday school class studied this passage in Luke 10. Oh, I didn't read it. Well, here's the passage in Luke 10. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to Jesus and said, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things. But few things are needed, or indeed, maybe only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her." So my 4th grade class was studying that passage about Martha's seemingly inappropriate concern for her domestic obligations. And I was very struck by it. "Don't be worried about many things," Jesus said, which I took to mean, don't be too worried about doing your household chores. And Jesus continued, "Mary has chosen the better part," which clearly did not include cleaning up her room. Now, I was a sly little kid, a bit devious, and I thought to myself, the message of these verses may prove to be very useful. In those days, I loved to assemble plastic airplane models. After that Sunday school lesson, I came home, spread out all the parts for a B-52 on my bedroom floor, glued some of them together, and left the others strewn about. My father peeked in, looked irritated, and ordered me, "Clean up this mess right now." I replied, I'll do it later. Don't bother me now. I can't be worried about many things, as Martha was. I, you see, have chosen the better part. Jesus doesn't want me to be distracted with household chores." Unconvinced, my father said, "What exactly are you doing that Jesus would approve of?" So I invented something quickly. "I'm thinking about the Trinity," I explained. Dad then asked, "Then why do you have all these model parts spread all over the place and a bottle of airplane glue in your hand?" Groping for an explanation, I replied, "Oh, I'm keeping my hands busy, and that just helps me focus my thoughts on spiritual matters." Now, I didn't know it at the time, but in my own childish way, I was articulating a long tradition of Christian reflection concerning Martha. She's received a very, very bad reputation in many churches. She's been cast as a paragon of worldliness, of superficiality, of messed up priorities. Many Christians have said, "What a jerk she was. She had the opportunity to learn spiritual truths directly from Jesus' mouth, and instead, all she could think of was doing the dishes." Some Christians have concluded that a life of prayer and constant love for others is the only way to please God, and that any concern about earthly needs and wants is a mark of unchristian selfishness and materialism. But I want to put in a good word for Martha. I want to start a Martha Anti-Defamation League. Was she really so wrong? It doesn't sound like she was being selfish at all. She was probably cleaning up the house to receive Jesus and his followers. Somebody had to get the food ready. Somebody had to make sure that there were enough plates and drinking cups for all those disciples. Just think of the way it is in a congregation. We need people to work in the kitchen, fixing the salad and making the coffee for the covered dish dinner, just as much as we need the preacher. So if we always neglected these mundane tasks, surely our lives would devolve into chaos. Should we devote all our attention to diligent study of the Bible and to intense prayer and contemplation? Should I have devoted more time this morning to praying over my sermon and not taken a few minutes to brush my teeth? No, that doesn't make biblical sense. Jesus cared deeply about people's everyday needs. He wanted human lives on earth to flourish, and so he enabled the lame to walk and gave sight to the blind. Last week you heard from Catherine Williams about the compassionate Samaritan. Now the Samaritan didn't just invite the wounded wayfarer to pray with him. No, he took practical steps to make sure that the guy's physical needs were attended to. And Jesus did not just show concern, and Jesus did show concern even for the small stuff in life, the creature comforts that make life pleasant. He healed Peter's mother-in-law so that she could get supper ready. He turned water into wine so that the wedding festivities at Cana could continue. So what did Jesus mean when he upbraided Martha for being too concerned about many tasks? I think Jesus was really talking about life's priorities in Martha's life and in any person's life. He was dealing with the issue, what is the ultimate focus for an individual's existence? What is it that a person lives for? And what is it that gives her brief time on earth meaning? Let's consider one way of giving meaning to life. I'm going to call it the path of earthly flourishing. According to this path, having a full life can be defined purely in terms of the satisfaction of earthly needs. To be happy in this view is to enjoy physical health, have adequate financial resources, to receive the affection from family and friends, to participate in civic life, to have leisure to pursue hobbies, to enjoy the collegiality and respect of one's peers, and to feel some pride in one's job. So, in this view, the point of life is to raise a family, play some golf, travel a little, get promoted, own some good medical insurance, and have a hefty retirement fund. Let's call this the horizontal axis of life. And for some people, that's all they hope for. If you have interpersonal intimacy, peer affirmation, robust health, and financial security, then you have everything in this view. Of course, in order to pull this project off, you need to make sure that things go your way. You need to exert some effort and do some planning. To keep the respect of your friends, you need to keep the living room clean. To enjoy some leisure activities, you need a job with an adequate number of vacation days. To look forward to a comfortable retirement, you actually these days need about $1 million in assets minimum. And that means you need a lucrative job, which means you need a good education. That adds up to a lot of tasks that you need to be concerned about. Even more tasks than worried Martha. Maybe Jesus was worried that Martha had that sort of vision of the good life, the horizontal one. Maybe he was afraid that she was living entirely on the earthly plane. Maybe he suspected that her entire life was consumed by making sure that the floor was swept so that the neighbors would not criticize her. Jesus wasn't critiquing her specific behavior on that day alone, but he was raising the question of the basic goal and direction of her life as a whole. So in Luke, Jesus consistently raises the haunting, disorienting possibility that there may be something more important than all our mundane forms of happiness. In addition to the horizontal axis, there may be another axis, a vertical axis of the spiritual life. Maybe there's a kind of joy possible that has nothing to do with earthly good fortune, a kind of resilient joy that can survive even when things don't go well for us in the world. Maybe there is a form of happiness that could survive the loss of family affection, could survive social ostracism, vocational failure, poverty, disease, and political defeat. Maybe down deep our hearts are restless for that sort of joy, a joy that the world can neither give nor take away. I was recently reminded of the attraction of this other sort of joy. I was at a theological conference last year with Crown Prince Ghazi bin Mohammed of Jordan, the 11th in line to the Jordanian throne. I want to make it clear, I usually don't fraternize with royalty. And he joked that he would have to assassinate 10 of his siblings before he could ever become king. And although he is royalty, he is a serious religious scholar with a doctorate in Islamic philosophy and another doctorate in early Christian thought. Oddly, we became friends. After a while, he asked if, now that we were on personal terms, if it would be all right for him to just call me Lee. I said, of course. And I asked him how he would like to be addressed. And he responded, oh, let's be informal. Your Exalted Royal Highness will be sufficient. And he was serious. I had to call him that. Anyway, he said something very memorable. I had asked him, what's it like to be so rich and powerful and influential and famous? He pondered that, and he reflected, I've grown up in a palace, and all my wants and desires have been immediately attended to. I have a stable, loving family, a beautiful wife, in fact, a few of them, a wonderfully delightful new daughter, enormous political power, the best education on earth, and I've been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. But there has always been something missing. Let me tell you, the whole world is not enough. All the power, all the fame, all the money are not enough. To be truly content, and I mean truly content, you have to love God with all your heart, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. Only that is sufficient. Now, he was a Muslim, but he was articulating the basic message of Christianity. An enduring and indestructible form of happiness can be achieved by denying oneself and losing oneself in love for the neighbor. Notice that this passage about Mary and Martha comes right after the story of the compassionate Samaritan. That story was the message that Martha should have been listening to. The preceding parable tells us what the better part that Martha should choose actually is. I know one of the first responders from 9/11 who searched the rubble of the demolished World Trade Center looking for possible survivors. Predictably, he is now dying of a cancer that is the product of attempts to rescue other human beings. But reflecting on his situation, he mused that if he had it to do over again, knowing that he would eventually get a lethal cancer, he said he would still do it. He said that there is a mysterious contentment and peace that comes from knowing that you have given everything in order to help others. That happiness, he said, is unlike any other reward or satisfaction that life can provide. He said he wouldn't trade it for anything, not even for a longer life. And down deep, maybe we all know this. There is a unique kind of exhilaration that comes from even little episodes of self-giving. From donating a weekend to work for Habitat for Humanity, or to go on a mission trip to West Virginia, for volunteering to set up chairs for a church event, for buying a cup of coffee for a person who lives on the streets. That should be the goal of life, to love God and neighbor unstintingly and extravagantly, as the compassionate Samaritan did. But then, what does this mean for poor Martha and for all of us who have many, many worldly tasks and things to worry about? Should she never clean the house? No. I think that Jesus meant this. All the little things about life that we treasure can be regarded not as ends in themselves, but as the means to the end of loving God and neighbor more deeply. So by all means, Martha should clean up the house, but not because she was anxious about what the neighbors might think of her domestic skills, but because she wanted to offer a clean house as a gift of hospitality to those very same neighbors. The most mundane tasks can be expressions of neighbor love. The Scottish Presbyterians, who may have been the ancestors of some of you here, often repeated a maxim: you can peel a potato to the glory of God as long as you peel it to perfection for the good of your neighbor. So most of the trivial things that we do every day can be an instance of Christian love if the goal is to contribute something to the well-being of humanity. If you're a plumber, do your job not just to earn a living, but to keep the water flowing in your neighbors' homes. And when you brush your teeth in the morning, do it not just to prevent your own oral decay, but to avoid inflicting stinky breath on your neighbors. The goal of love can shape and frame every little thing that we do. The problem with Martha was that Jesus suspected that the many tasks that she was anxious about had nothing to do with the pursuit of a life of love. Now, the Presbyterian heritage has been sensitive to the difference between performing a task for selfish reasons and performing a task because of one's love for God and neighbor. 2 weeks ago, President Litch lifted up the theme of self-sacrifice that has been so important in the Reformed tradition. This distinction between self-serving motivations and self-giving love was enshrined in a Presbyterian ordination question that was asked all candidates for ministry from the 18th through the early 20th century. Now, the question was stark and it was shocking. It was this: are you willing to go to hell if God would be glorified and your neighbor would be saved by your own damnation? The expected answer was yes. I love God and neighbor that much. I love God and neighbor more than my own salvation. But if a person said, no, we talking eternal flame, that sort of thing, fire and brimstone? No, not part of my vocational ambitions. That meant that their primary motivation was a kind of spiritual selfishness, and that therefore they were unfit for ministry. Now that question fell into disuse, but I heard it revived during the examination of a ministerial candidate on the floor of the Presbytery of the James in Virginia. She was one of my students, and she was perfectly orthodox. She was being asked questions, but giving all the standard right answers. And as a result, everybody got a little bored. So one retired pastor, very elderly, just to liven things up, said, let me ask you a question that was asked me at my ordination exam, "Are you willing to go to hell for the glory of God?" She'd never heard that question before, was a little put off by it, but she was quick on her feet. She said, "I can go one better than that. This whole presbytery can go to hell for the glory of God." And she got ordained. Now, Jesus' worry about Martha and her orientation may be exceedingly timely. For right now, our society is de-emphasizing love for our neighbors. The general culture, and particularly the media and the political realm, focus more on the satisfaction of immediate personal needs so that people will buy more products and politicians can glean more votes. Advertising promises that the ultimate good is having enough money to take a cruise, purchase medical insurance, and support a functional family. A few years ago, there was a VW commercial with an actress dressed up like a nun so that people would trust her, who pointed to a VW and said, "This car can save your soul and make you blessed." Our culture encourages consumerism, materialism, narrow horizons, and escapism. In short, the cultural dynamics reinforce a narrow, self-interested narcissism and discourage an expansive concern for others. The power of worldliness in our culture is great, but the grace of God is even more powerful. God still inspires acts of self-giving. Parents still sacrifice vacations in order to send their kids to college. Citizens with adequate medical insurance still worry about how their less fortunate neighbors can have access to health care. Teachers still use their own funds to buy resources for their students. Lawyers still go the extra mile and put in some unbilled hours for their less affluent clients. There is still something about Jesus' message of self-giving love that draws the human heart, even now. So I remain optimistic. Love will win. That has been a perennial Presbyterian conviction. God is sovereign, and all will be well in the end. The anti-love forces may look overwhelmingly strong and terribly daunting, but love is stronger still. God's love, the better part that Jesus spoke of, will win. Our God has promised that, and it shall be so. Amen.